Hey guys, Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to Between Two Mimbers. This is Zabe, brought to you by Mantiq Media. Now, this is going to be our second episode. First episode, again, really appreciate the response that we received. It was a joy recording with my co-hosts, but I'm also believing that there were some confusions which will be addressed in due time. Before I do that, I want to quickly introduce my co-hosts. As always for the show, I have Sarosh and Ali Kazim Bhai. Hey guys.
Assalamu alaikum.
Salam. Anyway, I know I hear that you wanted to not set the record straight per se, but I mean there were some confusions around some of the stuff that we discussed in the first episode. So why don't you just address those before we dive into our episode?
Yes, so thanks a lot for that. So not more of a confusion, but just to sort of clarify the difference between the program and the platform, right? Mantiq Media is a platform, so we're going to have multiple different types of programs within the platform, right?
Between it's like a channel.
Yeah, it's a channel. Think of it as a channel. I don't want to call it a channel, but
right.
Think of it as exactly the same thing. And Between Two Mimbers is a program on it, right?
Right.
You're going to have constant members on it. I might not be in here for the next episode or the episode after that. I might come in the future again, but there are going to be different people rotating for this specific program. And inshallah, in the upcoming months, we're going to have more programs being launched on Mantiq Media that I'm currently working on. So that's one clarification. And the second clarification I just wanted to make was some people were concerned for our first episode, Unapologetically Shia. So we are not trying to create any issues or creating fitna or anything like that. What we are arguing against is do not hide history, and we're going to talk about it academically, right? We are not saying we want to talk about it from an emotional perspective or go after a certain group of people and say, no, admit this or we're not talking to you. You know, we're all about building bridges. We're all about peace. But we are also about putting the right picture in front of you of history, right? Putting the right history in front of you. When the Pope met Allah Sistani, a few days ago, he never apologized for what the Crusaders did, right? But because history is there, or what Christians have done, or the way they've persecuted the Muslims in history. So the past is the past, right? But we all can live knowing what the true history is. We all can live owning the past and moving forward. And that's exactly what we are trying to do. We are not trying to create any division. So just clarifying that. That was the clarification.
Right. And then just a quick add on that. I mean, not too much about what's the right and what's the wrong. I think more from my perspective is just putting our narrative out there, which is something that, lacks comprehension and even discussion in the main media, especially in the podcast space. So the idea is for us to not really create any havoc or any ripples or try to, have an impact on anything like that. There's nothing like that we have in mind. The idea is that we own up to what we are and academically, albeit, but discuss what we, what our our beliefs are, what our narrative is, without being apologetic about it. I think that was the idea.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So with that, we'll quickly move on to the episode, or the discussion for the episode per se. So today we're talking about Shias in the United States. And when I brought it up as a discussion point with this group for an episode, what I was thinking was just to dive into what the religion of Islam, specifically Shia Islam, has had in terms of history in the U.S. and what has been some of our pros and cons, or some observations that we've had about the way the religion is either practiced or carried forward, going around different communities. So with that, I mean, my first, I would say, item that I would really want you guys to discuss is do we think, or do we know if we have like a rich history in the US as a sect of Islam, which is maybe not that prevalent in even the Islamic countries, but is quite a strong and like you said, unapologetic brand of Islam. What do you guys think? Ali bhai, why don't you just start us off?
Yeah, thank you. Very, very interesting subject when you brought it up. A lot of things that can go in it. I would like to start off with a Quranic ayah. It's about hijrah, right? Migration, and that's who we all are here as migrants. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والذين هاجروا في الله من بعد ما ظلموا لنبوئنهم في الدنيا حسنة ولا أجر الآخرة أكبر لو كانوا يعلمون صدق الله العظيم. Right? This is Surah Al-Nahl, the B, Surah 16, ayat 41. And it basically says to those who leave or migrate their homes in the cause of Allah after suffering oppression or persecution, right? This is key in it. It doesn't say who just do it. It's after suffering some kind of oppression or persecution. We have assured them a good place in this world, but the true reward lies in the hereafter, right? And which will be greater only if they realized, right? And this is a message to Allah, from Allah to the people, saying that do not be afraid of leaving your homes and going outward, right? Do not be afraid of leaving your comfort zone, right? And that's who we are in a way, right? If one of the things that and Shab Miraj just passed yesterday, day for yesterday. It's like yesterday in some places, day for yesterday in some other places. And if you look at it, one of the things that Allah has given Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is what He actually gave him hijrah, right? It's one of the things that was given to him when it says, "Oh, I've given you this, I've given you the best ummah, I've done this, I've given you that." It also says, "I've given you hijrah." Right? And one of the first Islamic hijras, where we start our Islamic hijri, the Islamic era actually starts off from migration, right? It actually started off from migrants who were migrating from Mecca, where they were being persecuted, where they were being oppressed, to Medina, right?
Right.
I just wanted to highlight that point, that migration is from the eyes of Allah is seen as a great thing. And of course, a lot of us, especially the Shias, if you talk to them, they have escaped majority of them have escaped some sort of persecution or oppression in their original countries, they were in what they were born in, and then they are here in the United States as a second home. If you talk to a lot of the people, especially in the South Asian communities, you will see a lot of them are here for one reason or the other, right? And that, the 95% of that reason is being oppressed in their home country, in their homelands. With that said, I want to also take the opportunity to highlight the fact that we're not talking about European migration, right? Why are we specifically talking about the United States? Is because European migration started off from the time of the Prophet, right? And then from the time of the early rulers of Islam, and then the time of Imam Ali, the European migration, the African migrations, right, started off at that time. the earliest known migrations to the United States or the continental America basically started in the 1900s. As far as the United States is concerned, I don't think we have records. Maybe we do, but as far as my history is concerned or knowledge is concerned, is I think less than 100 years is when we do. Especially South Asian migration started early in the 60s, and then it picked up really it picked up in the 80s, the 90s, and then in the 2000s is when we see an explosion of Shia population migrating to the United States because of heavy persecution in their homelands.
Right. Sarosh, I think when we were discussing briefly about the topic before we started recording, you mentioned something about Detroit, right, being one of the places where some of the in
Michigan
Dearborn,
area, yeah, Dearborn,
yeah,
of course. Anyone,
yeah,
and especially many of our audience members will be familiar. One of the meccas, no pun intended, of
right,
Shia and Muslim epicenters is Dearborn, Michigan. And
right,
since at least the 1930s, we've had a sizable Shia Arab population, mostly of Lebanese descent. In fact, a side tidbit, talking to some of the ulama, one of the ulama who led the Salat al-Mayyit for Shaheed Malcolm X was actually a Shia Alamuddin.
oh
So,
wow,
yeah, it's a little known fact, but yeah, so, Shiaism has been, at least for the last 100 odd years, been something that America has had. Perhaps most Americans are not familiar with it. And in fact, I mean, to Ali Bhai's point, yes, there's been a huge, like especially with the South Asian variety of Shias, there's been an explosion since, at least the 1990s with the tech boom. And I would say I think most folks in America did not really understand the difference between what a Shia or a Sunni or any of this was until I would say at least like the 2003 Iraq War,
yeah, yeah,
and
Yes.
the rise of the Shia Crescent, so-called Shia Crescent in the Middle East.
right,
Um, so yeah, to that point, yeah, it's we are growing. We are a very fledgling new group compared to other groups. But I mean, if you look at the history of the United States itself, the U.S. itself is less than 240 years old, and the immigration or the rediscovery of the New World, as they call it, is less than about 500-600 years. So, in that, yes, we could say we are Johnny come lately, but in the grand scheme of things, I think this is a pretty good start that we have even in the early 1900s, or the at least till the 1930s, we have Shias in the West.
right.
Now,
And is it? Yeah, go ahead.
and the other point I do want to make, we do not have records because unfortunately, when the transatlantic slave trade was going on in the 1600s, that there may have been Shias who were captured and brought here as slaves. We do know that there were Muslims here, but we cannot for
Right,
sure say if they were Shia because, obviously the the powers that be were not interested in their indigenous religion. Rather, they wanted to, convert and use these folks as labor or as free labor. So they were not interested in their creed or their mother. So, unofficially, we could postulate that there might have been Shias here since the very inception of the slave trade.
right. And then knowing especially that Shia Islam was not prevalent, but at least existing in Northern Africa,
Yeah,
or parts of Northern Africa where there might be some slaves that United States may have used them for.
precisely.
What I've also heard, I don't know if this is true or not, and this is more pertaining to Australia, but I mean this kind of like brings up the point of like our grand scheme of immigration and our footprint in the West and the US particularly, is that I've heard that if I think the first Imam Barga in let's say Australia wasn't we didn't have an Imam Barga in Australia more than 50 years ago. So it seems quite recent. Do you guys know when we had our first Imam Barga in the US, something like that, or is it like in and around that historical number, like 50 years? It seems like a very small number to have an Imam Barga. I think I was listening to a Madlis some time back, and I think it was Shansa Naqvi. He mentioned that he was speaking about the persecution in Pakistan, of our sect, and how this has kind of backfired on the people who are persecuting us, because previously 50 years ago there was no Imam Barga in Australia. Now there are Imam Bargas, and our alims are going there. Most notably Nadeem Sarwar lives there now. So so that kind of like pushed us out of our comfort zone per se, and brought us here to the US or Australia or other countries. But do you guys have any idea when when we had our first Imam Barga or a cultural center or anything like that in the US?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Saroj.
Oh, so well, I can. Whereas I cannot attest for all the other communities, I can give you the brief history of Sabah, our home community
Right.
here in Bay Area. It started, and I'm going to give a shout out to the man who started it in 1979, Brother Ahmed Mirza. He literally picked up what was the yellow pages, which I don't think many of our viewers may even remember what those are. And he
Those are
literally looked.
literally pages that are yellow, just if someone's wondering.
Exactly, and they were basically a contact query for everybody that lived here.
Right.
And
So basically they
basically the story goes, and I mean I've heard it from my older brothers, and I'm sure there's parts of it are exaggerated, but this guy, this Hyderabadi uncle, in 1979 called all the any Shia sounding name and literally asked them, "Are you Shia?" And hey, I am planning to do a majlis of Imam Hussein in my house. Come through. And
right.
they bought I believe, a small apartment or like a house or something off of Alum Rock in San Jose. And, that's, to your point, that's, if you do the math, that's like 42 years ago. So yeah, that's right there in that within that last 50-year ballpark range. I mean, and
Right. Wow. And we're talking about like Bay Area being, one of
yeah,
the prevalent communities now, but
yeah,
40 years ago it wasn't even like nothing was here.
yeah. There was a small two-bedroom apartment or two-bedroom house where 20 people used to come, and for 10 days, that was it. The Ayame, the Ashura, the first Ashura of Muharram.
Right, right. Wow. Alibai, do you have any recollections of that?
More than recollections, right?
Not to suggest that you were here when this happened.
No, so I would put it this way, right? I was listening to an episode on Crime TV in Urdu, TV channel online, and they had a lot of these folks who had started Imam Bargas back in the day. I don't remember a lot of the names. I do know a personality that I know personally well is Brother Sajjad Mir. And he has not only been a part of the Sabah community, the Bay Area community for a while, but he's actually been a part of the Los Angeles community for a while, right? I mean, he's one of the founders of Jafriya Islamic Center, which is one of the first Islamic centers or Shia centers in the Los Angeles area, right? And then from there, now there are approximately in the greater Los Angeles area close to 6 or 7 Shia centers, right? Including a full-time Islamic school. And when he was talking to some of the other folks, they were sharing their experiences, and they were talking about how it was hard in the 60s when they came, or 70s, and they were trying to find people, and they would actually go into colleges and try to find names which were very similar, right? They would try to find Mirs, they would try to find Zadis, and they would try to find Kazimis or Abdis and stuff like that. Like, are you a Shia, right? Are you? And that's how they would try to connect with each other. So it was very interesting back in the day when there was no internet, there was no Facebook or MySpace or any of these, how they would connect with each other, right? Other than that, if you take my experience, I came here before 9/11 had happened, and before the, I think it was Orkut back in the day. That was the community, or if I remember correctly, we had IRC.
Yeah.
I arrived in Los Angeles, so I was very lucky to have a newly built Malwarga that was just built by late Abbas Yar Khan, I believe his name, and it was Fatmiya Islamic Center. When I arrived, there was Fatmiya, there was you had Imam was just being established, you had the Babul Ilm, and you had Jafri at that time. But then I was talking to some of my friends who were arriving from either Pakistan or from the Middle East, who were all Shias, who were arriving in different states. And I remember talking to a friend in Minnesota, and he was in a specific university, and he said that, I found a couple of people here. The way we do it is the way we do Dua Kumail is we actually get together in one of the apartments, and we hear do the Dua Kumail, and then we hear a majlis, and that's about it, right?
Wow.
And then as things started happening, I started getting involved in a lot of different forums and in the community, figured out there's so many cities out there. I ended up in Las Vegas once, right? And I realized, where's the Imam Barga here, right? I mean, I want to go pray, but I can't find any. And then I realized I spoke to an alim, and he said that he actually goes and gives a speech in a house because they don't have a center. And I think for the last, alhamdulillah, now they do have a big center. It's a mixed community center for all ethnicities, and but it opened in the last 10 years. I don't know the exact timeline, maybe 7 years now, 5 years now, but they didn't have one, right?
Wow.
The big metropolitan areas had one: New York, New Jersey, Florida, Houston, Chicago.
Yeah.
You have Los Angeles, the Bay Area, maybe Seattle, right? But that's about it. Some of these smaller county or smaller states still don't have a center. I mean, think about it. Alaska still does not have a Shia Islamic center. And this is something I was looking at last week, right? Because I was trying to help somebody out who's looking for an alim. And I'm like, okay, let me go research. I've never heard of anybody going to Alaska and preaching and what's going on. And so I find out there's absolutely no centers. There are two mosques which are led by Sunni imams, but there's absolutely no Shia center there, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there are people who are working there.
Mm-hmm.
That is interesting.
You can go to some of the other states as well. For example, Delaware or South Carolina. I know there's one in North Carolina. I'm not sure about South Carolina or Arkansas and places like that where I'm not sure where the Imam Bargas are. Or if you go to a place like Alabama, in Alabama you have a center in the capital. I'm forgetting the name, but if you go out of that city, you will have absolutely no centers, right? There are no centers. So there are people who actually drive for hours to come and attend a majlis. In the Bay Area, I mean, until Tracy had a center, people were actually driving from Tracy and Modesto to attend majalis in ICZ or
in Bakersfield. Even Bakersfield, I actually met a brother who's from Fresno, and at UT, he's going to UT, and he was telling me, yeah, we just got our center, and before that, we were either going to LA or we were going to Sacramento or coming to the Bay Area. And to your point, Ali Bhai, in North Carolina, they actually have an indigenous African American Shia mosque that has been around at least since the 80s.
Right. One thing that I wanted to also, I mean, maybe didn't think about talking about this, but since we are kind of like deep into the discussion around centers and Islamic centers and Imam Bargas in the U.S., my question to you was, I mean, maybe not a question. I think I wanted to get you guys' thoughts on having multiple centers in a community, right? There seems to be a little bit of a I wouldn't say controversy, but some eyebrows are raised every time there's a new center opening up, or different centers are coming up with their different ideas of how to observe majalis or milads, right? And there seems to be a little bit of a confusion around the fact that, okay, if you have a different center, you're kind of already breaking up a very small community, while if you have one center, let's say Sabah, probably the first in the Bay Area for us, maybe not the first, but maybe the first of its type in the Bay Area for us, and people think that other centers that came after that, they were just muddying the waters, so to speak, and not really adding too much value, or it wasn't needed per se, because it's a small community. Why do you need 3 Imam Bargas or 4 or 5, right? And My opinion to that was that it's kind of ironic that people say that, especially when they're coming from countries where there's an imam barg in every block of where they live, and they had no issues with that, and nobody has an issue with that if there's a masjid or a mosque in every other street, especially from in India and Pakistan. Um, do you guys think that's okay to have different centers? And obviously with that, you have different people with their mentality and their mindsets, running those institutions. Or do you feel like it should be one place where everyone comes, so that it gives a picture of unity and mingles with other ethnicities, if and not really create a separate Jadis ki masjid, as we like to refer it in Urdu.
Mhm.
Sarosh.
I'll let Levi speak first on this, because I
Okay.
know he.
You're putting me in a very. This is a very. How would I say this? Is a very.
It's a very delicate and touchy topic.
Very delicate. Very.
No, but I mean, maybe give me the merits and
complex.
demerits of give me merits and
So-
demerits of having multiple institutions, and
Okay,
why is it bad to have it? Like, why is it bad, and then why is it good? Maybe objectively we can discuss that.
So let me start off with something different, right? Along the same lines, right? I think we have to realize first off, what are the people what are the groups of people that have migrated to the United States, right? I think we need to
Right.
start from there, right? We do know there are people who are moving in from different parts of the world, right? We have a big South Asian diaspora, right? Then we have a big Middle Eastern diaspora. We have a big Persian diaspora. Then we have African diaspora, and then other countries, right?
Right.
Now, when you take that, you also have to realize that they all have their own own unique ways of doing azadari and commemorating events, right?
Right.
With that said, you also have to filter in more with that. What generation are they, right? And by that, what I mean is, have they come here in the 60s? Have they arrived here in the 80s, 90s? Have they come here in the early 2000s? Or have they just arrived here 5-10 years ago, right?
Right.
Why do I say this? It's very important. Why, to think about it is very important. The reason is, the ones who have arrived here in the 60s as students or as professionals, you need to realize some of them already have their 4 generations grown up as adults, right? The ones who arrived in the 80s, 90s have their 3rd generations. Who arrived in their early 2000s have their 2nd generations, right? And the ones who are just arriving or arrived 5 years ago are the 1st generation, right? The reason it's important is because that's how their worldview has shifted or changed, right? The ones who just arrived from, I can talk a lot about the South Asian diaspora, right? And the Middle Eastern diaspora to a certain extent. That when we are arriving, we are looking, any place where you go, there's a I listened to someone, an author called Simon Sinek. I don't know if you've heard of him. He talks a lot about this village mentality that humans have, right? In your own countries or wherever you are, you would not notice somebody who is, for example, if you're in the United States, and if I see you here, I'll be like, yeah, okay, another Desi, okay, whatever, right? Or if I see somebody speaking Urdu outside, I wouldn't be as concerned, because I'm, where I am in Houston, there are a lot of Desis, right? But for example, if I end up somewhere in Alaska where every other person I see is white, right? And randomly I see some person talking Urdu, that just generates my interest in trying to figure out who this person is, right? And go like,
Right.
hey, buddy, who are you? How are you? Where are you from? I, heard you're speaking Urdu. And trying to make that connection, right? So the same way as humans, we still have that village mentality, that we seek similar people, right? We seek a similar culture. So when people arrive here, the first thing they do is try to find an Imam Barga or try to find a center that relates to them.
Yeah.
So they will try to find something that says, oh, is Urdu being spoken here, right? Okay, are the same type of speakers who I used to listen to or I've been listening to, will they arrive here or not, right? Then you have another group, which is the group that was born here and brought up here. They have a different mentality, right? For them, it's all about, hey, am I listening to English speakers because they make more sense to me, right? I want to listen to speakers who are talking about subjects that matter today. Are they talking about Black Lives Matter or not? Are they talking about LGBT or not? Right? Uh,
Mm-hmm.
all these different issues is what they seek. Right now, if you go to the older generation who have been here, for a very long time, and they arrived in the 60s, 70s, they're kind of in between both. They still want to stay in that old world, but they do realize the need for the new world, right? Because they've seen the generations change, they've seen the people change. Now, a lot of the older folk that I talk to who are in some of these management positions in imam bargars and centers, or who have been there, done that, they say that yes, it's a huge need that we need to do something for the youth. We need to do something for the next generation, because our youth are actively leaving the religion. They're not interested anymore, right? Whereas if you talk to some of the younger guys who have just moved, who are immigrants, first generation, and are in these positions, they'll tell you, no, what's the number one deal on their agenda? Which Maulana to bring in that's going to bring in more people to fund us, right? Yeah, you want to do youth programs, so they'll end up doing one youth program, and everything else is something that caters to their audience, right? So there's a very big difference between agendas of the age groups as well, right? So it's a problem of the generations, it's a problem of the mindset, it's a problem of what are we trying to achieve, right? There are some centers who are all about azadari, right? Azadari this, azadari that, which is not wrong, but that's what they focus on, right? Who are the best speakers to bring in, and who are the best know-how reciters to bring in for that specific azadari events, right? And there are some centers that say, no, we are only going to focus on our youth, for example, right? And that's what we're going to do. So to your question, why do we have these different centers? Because of
where do you lie in having more, like, having more centers versus having just one central center?
See, there's nothing wrong with having more centers as far as the objective is being achieved, right? What is the objective? I think that is the key. That is the key question, right? If the objective is just to have more centers because I want to have a center, that's the wrong objective. If the objective is I want to open a center in another city, which might be an hour away, because it's very hard for people to actually drive an hour and come to this major center, that's a very good objective. I think we should have centers every hour, right? I mean, when you drive by, if you see in the United States, one of the things you see is if you're driving by these smaller towns, you will see a church in every single town. Right? That's one of the major things you have. Even a small town, you'll have one school, that has all three levels in it. Elementary, middle, high. You have one hospital, and you have one church, right? So why can't we have one mosque every 2 hours, or every 1 hour, or Imam Barga, where there is a significant enough Shia population, right? And I feel like there's nothing wrong with that as far as the objective is being achieved. Where it comes to egos and people saying that, no, I want to build a center because I want to build a center, right? I think that's where the wrong objective is. So I'll stop at that and let Sarosh have at it.
Add to that, yeah, Sarosh.
Yeah, so I definitely agree with Ali Bhai. A short answer to your question, Zaid Bhai, is it depends. It really depends, and to talk about a person that Ali Bhai has talked about, Sajjad Uncle, Sajjad Mir. He's one of those individuals who I would say is looking forward thinking and thinking about what needs to be done, not only just for his generation. He is one of those who came in the 60s and 70s and is also interested in, hey, now I'm established here. I need to take care of, these kids, and these are my kids as well. And, I guess the point there goes on, why are you creating the center? Like Ali Bhai said, if the objective is, hey, we need a center, let's say, using the Bay Area example, ICZ is very strategically placed where it's in Pleasanton, and caters to a lot of the folks who are living in Contra Costa County and in eastern Alameda County. Whereas, with Dare Batul, for instance, it is a cultural center which can focus on, Urdu and on aspect of Azadari where you may not be able to get in other communities. And now you also have, like, for instance, Sabah, which is like your Markazi or your central Imam Barga, which has all the different communities. And also, not only them, but you also have ICCNC and Oakland, or like Muhammadiyah and Fatimiyya that tend to be more of the Farsi speaking centers. So I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but it should. I guess the better question would be, when we are creating these centers, are we doing it to serve our own nafs, or are we doing it for the love of the Ahlul Bayt? I think that should be the objectifying question. Because, I'll use my own example. For instance, I like to listen to Amar Nakshwani. I like to
Hmm.
listen to, I'm into Matam and Azadari. And, if I'm creating it because that's what I like, then it's not about my like or dislike. It's about, am I serving a aspect of the community? Am I doing it because I didn't get a board membership? And unfortunately, that is a reality in a lot of these communities is, oh, I wasn't elected to the board, or, oh, I came here in 1970, so the way I do things is the way we should always do. And it's, and I was actually having this discussion with a brother yesterday, offline, about how whatever we're doing, and this actually goes back to our main point. There's a diversity of groups here. I'll give you a simple example. For instance, my wife, she's Khoja. She's Pakistani Khoja. And, I come from an Urdu speaking background. And, we talked about this, how if we were in Pakistan still, the likelihood of us getting married, let alone forget married, for us even meeting would be next to impossible, because people, like Ali Bhai said earlier, it's this village mentality. You stick to the people you know. But
Right.
when we come here, the unifying factor a lot of times, like for instance, I'll give you the community of Austin. The biggest unifying factor there is you believe in La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah Nabiyyun Waliyullah. And yes, it's nice to say that that is enough, but at times it's not.
Right. Yeah.
Especially,
It's just sometimes it's just the color of your skin. You're like, oh, this is a
mm,
brown guy and must be from
exactly,
India, Pakistan. I
exactly,
can be his friend.
exactly. And you're able to relate because you have shared experiences. For instance,
Right.
right before this whole thing started, Zaid Bhai and we were talking about cricket, which,
Right.
I have a lot of really good friends who are, Lebanese, and they are, Iranian, and even, like indigenous, like African American and white converts, but they're not going to be able to relate with me about cricket the way, I can relate with someone from my own culture. Or,
Right. Right.
like, Rajab ke Kunde, right? Like we just had 22 Rajab pass, 22nd of Rajab pass, and, you have to have kheer and puri. And, trying to explain that to someone who's not from that culture, it's difficult. So
Right.
I think, it's a balance you have to play of, what you are trying to preserve in your culture versus recognizing you are in a new environment that will develop its own culture.
I think that's a great point, right? Whereas if you take a lot of the communities, it's not as a lot. Yeah, I mean, we as the community grows, the issues grow, and every single community that I have spoken to or been part of, right, or have connections in. Always you see what exactly happened. Why was the second center opened? Very, I would say 1 out of 10 times I've heard that because we had a need to do it, right?
Mhm.
Most of the time what I've heard is because there was a fight, right?
Yeah,
And this is like a
exactly,
norm in South Asian communities, right? That
exactly,
a second center opened because there was some sort of a fight, right? Some sort of
exactly.
an issue between groups,
Disagreement.
Exactly. I can,
disagreement, or in between
Ali,
members, right? And
yes,
Right.
disagreement
yes,
resolves. Fights are something that usually end up you opening your own center because you know what, I'm going to show you that I'm going to go and open my own center, right? And that's how it's done.
exactly.
uh and people don't realize, and that's also one of the keys. If you look at it, because there's a population boom in those cities, right?
Mhm.
Whereas if you see some of the smaller, like Salt Lake City, for example, one center, right? You take North Carolina, one center. Las Vegas,
Mhm.
one center. A lot
Austin,
of
for
these
instance,
cities cannot afford dual centers, right? It's great that a lot of centers are thinking of creating mega centers, right? And the mega
Mhm.
centers are where you have uh, if you're all from the corporate world, right? In corporate
Mhm.
world, we have these maturity models, right?
Mhm.
Right.
What does the maturity model do, right? A CMI and some of the other ones, what do? They start off very basic, right? This is the baseline, and then you start improving on top of those, right? As processes increase, as people increase, as you start getting more intelligent people, the intellect of the overall company increases, and you start getting into higher levels of these processes, right? So the same way you have to look at it, all these centers from a very maturity model standpoint, right? As when once the story, the first initial centers open up, the need was we need to do azadari, right? We need to we need to have speeches, we need to cry in the name of Imam Hussein. We need a specific place where we can do our prayers, right? And then as the community matured, they said, hey, we also need to bring in more people. Why are these African American people doing their own thing, and why are Iranian people doing their own thing? The Arabs doing their own thing. Let's bring them in, right? As they matured more, now they're talking about, hey, now we realize we actually have kids who are going here in schools. How do we, bring a school system within the community, right? And as they're maturing more, the next step could be industries and I don't know, like different business schools and universities and housing systems that are part of that specific community, right? And that just shows how the community is maturing as a whole. So my take is good centers, again, as I said, is a good thing. You should have multiple centers with multiple cultures in them. It just shows a healthy society, how healthy a community is, that it's able to do all these different things. As far as we're not doing it for us, as far as we're not satisfying our egos, we're doing it for a common purpose, I think it's okay to have multiple centers. That's my take on it.
Yeah, I mean, while you guys were describing about the brief history of the Bay Area centers, I mean, and I was thinking of it from a perspective of someone who moved here 5 years ago, right? So I was like, if that fight hadn't happened, I would be driving all over the place for a good majlis or anything like that. So it's kind of interesting how things kind of work out, and also given how small our community is, and then also how large this landscape is in the Bay Area, I think having 3 centers now, I mean, retrospectively, it's kind of a good thing in my opinion. Or maybe we can have more, because there's still people driving a good amount of minutes and hours, a good north of 45 minutes to get to a majlis or a milad, right? So just having centers is per se, as you mentioned, is not the problem. I think if the intention behind that is that I want to be a khalifa of my own place, and I would rule this myself, I think that's wrong. And then also I think that shows as well, right? When you go to these places, you kind of get that vibe that, hey, maybe this is not a spiritual place per se. And one interesting experience I would want to share with you guys, speaking of spirituality, and so when I moved here first, I was living in SF, and obviously the first thing you do is look for an imam barga or a mosque or something like that where I can go and meet people, and because I knew nobody here when I moved, like no family, no friends. And one of the first places I went to, I'm not going to name it, but I'm just going to give you a hint. You would probably guys know it's somewhere up in up north, in the North Bay. So I think that should suffice for enough hint. I ended up going there, took the BART, ended up going there. It was like in the afternoon, and the moment I walked in, I was like, wow, this is very different. This is not what I expected. The person who runs the place, or was like responsible for the place, was nice enough to give me a tour of the whole establishment, and it was quite impressive. It's big. It's one of those places which was like a church before, and now it's like a mosque and a center, and they have a good large prayer area. And so I prayed there, but then when I was coming back, I was almost disappointed, and nothing to do with what I saw, but more around my expectations, because I was thinking, I'm going to walk in. It's probably not going to be like in Jolie, but it should be, I should probably get some similar vibes, per se. So the spirituality kind of like varies from people to people. Some people may feel spiritual over there, and that's completely fine. I didn't per se. I was like, oh, this is different from what I'm used to. So I started looking, deeper into, okay, what other options are there in the Bay Area, and that's how I discovered Sabah and Taribatul, and that kind of like closed that gap, so to speak. So that was kind of like a very interesting experience I had when I first moved here.
So,
So, yeah,
Zay,
anyway.
I just want to move the conversation a little bit, right? And talk about your experience, right? So when you moved here, you moved here single, right? And you came in
Yeah,
as
yeah.
a young professional in the community. Uh,
I'm still a young professional, by the way. Yeah.
you're
Go
still
ahead.
young, man. I'll be able to say. But what now? Mashallah, you're married. Mashallah, you have kids, right? Alhamdulillah, they're growing up. They're starting school and things like that. What are some of the things that concern you, right? I mean, because we're talking about the Shias in the U.S. What are some of the things that concern you? What are some of the challenges that you're facing? And inshallah, I can talk about my experiences, and then we can come to we'll go to solution. Then I can talk about my experiences too. But what are
Yeah,
some of the things that you see as future?
I think when I first came, like I said, I mean, as I was describing it, it varies from need to need. My first need was, I needed to go and meet people. I need a place where I could meet like-minded people in terms of not just you know probably not ethnicity as much, but spirituality more. And so I think that has kind of changed now because I know people here. I think what I'm most concerned about the coming generation. I have a daughter who's just over a year old, and just thinking about what kind of world she will be living in, you know 10, 15 years down the line. I think my biggest concern and hope from the community is to be more forward looking. I think we've had a time where when our first generations moved here in the 60s, 70s, and they try to replicate your South Asian environment, which was okay. I'm still for that. I think it's completely fine. You can bring in your culture, and it's very unique, and that's completely okay. But I think there's a time where I think there has to be some self reflection that needs to happen, and they need to start wondering, okay, where are we going now? We've achieved that. We've achieved, we've had good majalis here. We have good matam here. We have good speakers and reciters coming in. Okay, done. Moved on. But we need to move on from it now. I think we've achieved something that's good. But I think we have to start looking, okay, what are we doing now? What should we do now? Especially people who've been here for a number of years. My expectation from them, let alone myself, I've been here for 5-6 years now, and I'm already thinking about, okay, what am I giving back to my immediate surroundings in the community, which is why and how we're doing this podcast and discussion is one way for us to at least have that discussion, but at least move in some sort of a direction. So my biggest expectation from centers and people who run the powers that be here is to at least think about, okay, what are we going to do now? We've done what we needed to do at the time. I think 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s it kind of made sense then to do what they did. And you can argue that it was probably the need of the hour, but I think the need of the hour has significantly changed now. And what is that? And I'm not going to put words in people's mouth or give my point of view, okay, what should happen, because that's probably going to be more from my perspective. But anything happening which is different from what is happening would be a move in the right direction, right? So I think just thinking about what we're doing in addition to what we're already contributing in terms of azadari and different programs that we have, I think there needs to be some questions around, okay, what kind of environment, because I feel there's this need to push the South Asian culture through our children, which doesn't work because they don't relate to it. They don't understand that because they haven't lived in Karachi like I have. They haven't had the experiences that I have living in Choli, for example, very heavy Shia population. They have their own thing. They have their own environment, and they definitely will not be able to relate to. My daughter will not be able to relate to that. So what she'll be able to relate to is what's happening in Sabah or other communities here in the US. And for me to just be open to that and not really push the narrative that I have been growing up with, the cultural narrative that is, I think that's where I feel like these centers should be moving towards, as opposed to just being constant. And I mean, stagnation in any way is not healthy. So I think there needs to be some ripples, some effect, something needs to happen. And whatever it is, whatever you want to do, just do something, is what my opinion would be.
I think
Sarosh?
that's amazing. So you're talking about more of a renaissance happening within the in the next generation of sorts.
Yeah, I mean, question everything. I mean, I was speaking to someone last year about I think juluses or like processions, and I mean, the whole idea of us having even in the processions, if you're having Arabic slogans or if you're having Arabic banners, it doesn't really address the crowd. I mean, I've seen so many curious people walk by and they have no clue what's happening. That's completely fine, because you can recite what you want to recite, but at least the banners should be in English. At least there should be a portion of the procession which just relates to English. I think there is. I mean, there are like processions within the procession that we have in the Bay Area. There's a portion that addresses the English like speaking, but that's more like towards the kids and not the adults as much.
And I definitely agree with you. The thing that we need to do is look at why are we doing these things? Is it just for me? Because look, we do have to cater to the older generations, right? Like we have older parents and we have people who are used to a certain way, and then we need to give them that sense of belonging and normalcy. But at the same time, we have to look at that, you know this is our home, and like you mentioned, Zebai, our kids will not be speaking Urdu. They will speak Urdu to us, but if I put them in a Rais Jarshvi Majlis or a the late Allama Talib Jawhari Majlis, they would not be able to. Majority of the stuff will fly over their head. Heck, I speak Urdu, and I understand Urdu, and I can sit in these majlises, and half the time this stuff is flying over my head. So it's that
Right.
acknowledgement of what we're doing is we have to cater for everybody, and we have to work together as and understand that for instance, when our ancestors came to the Indian subcontinent over 1,000 years ago, they all spoke Farsi or Arabic. Now imagine
Right.
if they kept pushing, their Arab and Farsi culture, like, and we would be a very different community.
I think
Very
that's a
small
great
community.
point. Yeah, a great point that you mentioned of migration of our ancestors starting off from if you take Sayyids, at least starting off from from Saudi, current day
Mhm.
Saudi Arabia, and moving on to the plains near near Jerusalem, and then from there moving on to the plains of Iran, Iraq, and then
Mhm.
South Asia. And a lot of us, like my parents, moved to the Middle East, and from there I moved here. I don't know, my kids stay here or where my third generation moves to, migrates to, right? And I think that's a great point, that the message should stay the same. It's not about where you're moving or how you're moving, but it's about what you're trying to achieve, right? What the message is. Uh, with that said, right? So Sarosh, correct me if I'm wrong. You're born and brought up here. What are some of your experiences, coming up, and not specifically within the Bay Area community, but overall as a Shia, whatever you heard, or the groups that you were part of? What was your experience like, and what are you
So
looking forward to now that you're, alhamdulillah, mashallah, married? Inshallah, in the future you will be having kids. What are some of your thought process?
yeah, so one minor correction. I actually was born in Karachi. I was
Oh,
8 when I moved to the
nice.
US. So I've been here since like 99. So basically, I mean, for all intents and purposes, I grew up here. And the thing is, I have seen a lot of changes. I've mashallah been part of at least 3 different communities in the Bay Area community, obviously my home community, then my Austin community, which is my adoptive community, where I lived there 6, 7 years, and then the Houston community, which I would frequent a lot while I was in Austin, and then lived there for about a year while I was going to grad school there. And the things that I think the common theme in all of them is that and I actually have it written down, we have this three-way Mexican standoff basically going on. You have the indigenous, African American and convert community, quote unquote, you can say convert community. Then you have, the first generation South Asian, particularly South Asian, as I am of South Asian background, I can speak to that, but also, a Middle Eastern background, folks who want to preserve their culture and their identity. And then you have, people like me and Ali Bhai who, well, technically we can relate to everybody, the other two groups, but we are a distinct group where we do have certain cultural practices that we want to preserve and retain, but we also understand that uh, our views and our cultures and practices need to be expanded to include the modern um, way of doing things. I'll give you an example. There's a couple brothers here in Darabatul that are, a couple years older than me, and their majlis is famous. They host a majlis for, at least 10, 15 years. And I remember I always used to look forward to their majlis because I wasn't getting nahari and tikka and pie. I was getting the zinger, the crispy chicken burger from Mirchi, which, in a subtle way, like, I mean, it's really subtle, but like to
It's very
have
desi. You
tabarruk,
call that zinger, by the way. I like that.
yeah. But the point being on that, right? Like, it's like you're evolving a form of azadari, or you're evolving, now there's a bunch of brothers who recite English nahas, and they're getting really good. There's I love, for instance, at Sabah, there's brother Matthew Falati who for years has been reciting English nahas, and it's become a part of our culture now. And
Yeah, it's a
that is
beautiful
the
part of our culture, by the way.
exactly. And that's, it gives, in a way, it gives agencies and ownership to not only our kids who are growing up here, but again, the indigenous population. We have a lot of, like the Virgin Mary Islamic Center, or there's a lot of ulama like Sheikh Nuruddin or Sheikh Ramadan and Sheikh Jafar Muhibbullah and others like them who are indigenous ulama, and it gives their kids and individuals who are converts to the community a sense of belonging and a sense of ownership that may not necessarily be there for them if things are in Urdu, Farsi, and Arabic, or are not, you know, oriented to our culture back home. I'll give you a simple example. In Pakistan, and Zeybhai, you can correct me if I'm wrong, it doesn't matter what day of the week the 10th of Muharram falls. The Karachi Jalus will go on MA Jinnah Road on that day,
Yeah,
and it will,
absolutely.
and it's that, I think, is the universality of our belief that you know the door of Istihad, for instance, is open. So if the door of Istihad is open, then that means Islam does not have a culture unto itself, but it's like water. It can adopt any culture that it's a part of.
And I think that's a great point, right? Uh, the evolving of the way things are done, right, rather than evolving of the religion itself. So you cannot, because the religion came when Islam came. Islam has been there, first of all, right? I mean, if you look at all the past religions, they've been called Islam, right? And but if you look at it from our perspective, I don't know, Islam came in the 680s. So from there till now, till the end of time, we say when the Quran comes, when the Quran came, when Islam came, it came till the end of time. There is no other religion coming, right? So that means that is the constant. Everything else around it evolves, right? And that's the slogan that Mantiq Media goes by. That everything else has to evolve. We have evolved. For example, we call one of the things in Urdu is that's all three of our mother tongue, that it's one of the best languages to write poetry in, right? And it's one of the best languages out there in terms of expression and the way people can put words in sentences together, etc. But it just came about 400 years ago, right?
Exactly.
It did not exist before that. My great grandfathers, your great grandfathers spoke Farsi or Arabic, for all that matters, right?
Right.
Exactly.
And so again, we evolved, right? And things evolved as humans beings. We evolved, not just from a religious standpoint of doing things, but also from a technology standpoint, from a medical standpoint, right? From a lot of different ways. So so that's a great point. And just coming back to the discussion that I asked you, out of all three of us, I can probably say that, from a schooling perspective, from a children's perspective, from going to a college perspective, I've sort of seen it all here, because I came here in the early 2000s in my mid-teens, and ended up in college. So I've seen when, and this is before 9/11, so I've seen when, we were trying to find, our own people, and we found, the brothers in the Sunni faith, and I found Shias, and we would all pray together on a patch of grass, right? But after 9/11 happened, there was a significant fear amongst everyone, and then there was some sort of a renaissance that happened within the Sunni community, that there was. I'm talking about Los Angeles, by the way. I don't know about other communities, but I've heard similar stories, that there was this Jamaat, that thing that started, right? And we would call them Jamaatis, right? And they took a hold, a deep hold on all these college communities, on all these MSAs, that, there was dawah happening everywhere. And the guys that I used to hang out with all of a sudden started having big beards and stopped talking to me, right? They knew I was Shia, right? And I felt isolated, right? And that's how I ended up, going deeply into my community, into the Shia community, because I was being isolated by my college friends, right? And found much better lifelong friends in the Shia community. With that said, right, I've seen the college life here, and then after being married, alhamdulillah, having 3 kids, mashallah, when my oldest about to go to high school, the middle one in middle school, and the youngest in elementary, right? So I'm seeing all 3 different life stages in terms of where you stand as a youth, and then you get married as a young adult, and now you're in a stage where I'm a young parent, right? With all that said, and with permission from you guys, let's continue this in part 2, because I think we're over time as of now. And inshallah, let's do this as a part 2, because I think it's interesting, and we'll start off with the life here, starting from elementary school all the way till a married life with kids. And inshallah, we'll go from there. And I'll send it off to Zay for closing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a fair point. I think it's a very, very important discussion, and a large discussion per se, given just by so much we've had to say while we're discussing this. I think we'll definitely continue this. And I think another aspect that we can add to our part 2 would be the cultural aspect that us Shias have in the US. And I think how we need to keep certain things and let go of the others. I think there needs to be a demarcation. I think I'm all for evolution, and I'm all for evolving and questioning everything. But I think certain things, in my opinion, my book, and we can have a larger discussion around this, is some things that you would probably hold on to and not really move it out of your ways of life or ways of living per se. So yeah, I think it's a fantastic discussion. Really appreciate it. And we'll continue this in part 2. See you again soon.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.